Okay, so today's topic is what do I charge? Really focused on pricing. And this isn't so much about how do you set a markup as it is about how do we figure out what it costs to produce something that we can then add a markup to that makes sense. And that's what we're going to look at. We're going to use the spreadsheet. You can see the first page on the screen already to be able to illustrate what we're talking about. And as we go through, you're going to learn several different things here. One of the things you're going to learn is what does it cost to operate your business? Or maybe I should rephrase that. You're going to learn the process for calculating out what it's going to cost to run your business. Secondly, you'll start looking at what does it cost to actually produce things within your business. And then third, we're going to look at how does the production techniques factor into pricing. Namely, if I'm doing 12 of something instead of 1 of something, is it really cheaper? And if so, why? Okay. And then finally, we'll look at putting in all the different factors that go into actual production so that you can set a baseline for what it costs to produce something. At that point, you can start talking about what kind of margins that you want to put onto it. But the reality is most people don't really know what it costs to produce something. They look at the cost of the item, the blank substrate, and then they try to throw in some kind of mysterious number for ink cost. There's a lot of attention, especially with sublimation, about ink cost, but as you're going to see, your ink cost is actually a very small piece of the puzzle because there's a lot more that goes into what it costs to actually produce something. Okay, we're going to start out, as I said, this is a spreadsheet. It's in Microsoft Excel. If you want to get a copy of it, you should be able to download it through Sign Warehouse. Now, with this particular spreadsheet, it's in Microsoft Excel, so as long as you can manipulate Microsoft Excel, you can manipulate it. Feel free to do anything you want to this particular spreadsheet. Okay, it's free of charge. It's a very good tool, but you can change it all that you wish. If you don't know how to use Microsoft Excel, you should learn. Very powerful tool. This is going to be something that can really, really help you put things into perspective. Now, the numbers we're going to look at as we go through the presentation, these are not like standards or anything. These are numbers that you really need to calculate for yourself rather than just using what you see on the screen, which is numbers that are there for the purpose of discussion. So you want to take these numbers, figure out what works for you. You also may be adding in different categories. You're going to see this first sheet here where it's entitled at the top, Cost Analysis Small Shop, that we're going to start talking first of all about what does it cost to run your business. And you're going to see different expense categories that I've chosen to use in the presentation, but you may have other expenses yourself. And the idea is for you to actually start listing all of that out and figuring out what it costs to run your business. Because let me tell you, everything's important. The cost of the Post-it notes, if your customer doesn't pay for that, you pay for that. So that really comes out of your pocket. Therefore, the cost of Post-it notes is an important part of the cost of operation. So I'm serious. I'm saying you want to figure out all the different costs. So what I've done is I've taken a number of different costs here and placed them in this particular page of the spreadsheet such that we can see everything on one screen, make it kind of easy. You probably have other categories you will be adding in yourself. So if you look down the left, you'll see the name of the category, and then you'll see columns going over to the right. For example, the type column, you see F and you see V. F means it's a fixed cost, meaning that it probably doesn't change on each pay cycle. It's fixed in place, whereas V is variable, meaning that it can vary or fluctuate every time you go to make that particular payment. And that's important because as much as we would love for this to be carved in stone, it's not, and things do fluctuate. That's why we use spreadsheets so we can kind of track it as we go. And we really should keep this thing up to date. And that's the beauty of the spreadsheet. We can put in new numbers and do new calculations. I know that most of your expenses are monthly, but not all of them are. Some of them are quarterly, some of them are annually, some of them are biannually, different ways that we pay some of the different expenses. And I prefer to have them all on a yearly format because months are a little bit uneven. So I'm working towards getting everything in the far right column into a yearly format. Now, as we go through, you can notice there's a color code that I use. Items that are in blue is data that you would need to generate yourself and plug it in. Items that you see in green, like this total down here, are things that are calculated for you by the spreadsheet. And occasionally you may see something in red, and that's really just to get your attention, probably more than anything else. Okay, so when we look down the list here, we can see that, you know, the nice thing about digital declaration, if you're a sublimator, you probably paid for your equipment with a credit card or wrote a check. You know, you didn't have a big cost there unless you bought, you know, a series of machines and fancy large heat presses and whatnot. So you probably aren't making a payment, but if you are making a payment, say to your credit card, because you made your own loan, definitely you want to have it in there. That's the cost of operation. So as you go down, I think you'll see most of these things are pretty self-explanatory that I've chosen. Consumable production supplies, this is where you'd put in your inks and papers and those type of things, the things that you go through on a routine basis. And then finally down here at the bottom, you'll see owner's draw or paycheck. And this is probably the most important category, the one that we never put in there. Because so many times we're told, listen, when you're calculating overhead, and that's what we're doing, your paycheck is not really part of the overhead because your paycheck comes out of the profits. That is true. If you're not making enough money to cover your operational costs, you certainly aren't going to be paying yourself. But if you're wanting to generate a basis for legitimate pricing, then you need to factor in your paycheck as if you were getting paid whether you are or not. Okay, the reality is all these other categories are going to get paid first, and then what's ever left over is where your paycheck comes from. So you'll see that I even put a little note here. Just because we put in our paycheck doesn't mean that we're actually going to make it, because in the beginning we probably don't have enough business to really pay ourselves or pay ourselves very much. But at least by factoring it in, then I have a more legitimate cost basis. So as my sales increase, I have the opportunity to pay myself without raising my prices, because the prices you're charging need to be based on all those costs being factored in. So you determine out what you want to pay yourself. Now, if this is making you nervous because you just started out and you're thinking, $62,000 to run this business, there's no way. Well, remember, the biggest expense when you look back here is your paycheck. Okay, so if you don't want to pay yourself, and you may not be in the beginning, like I said, you can see now when we change that to 0, that it came out to, what, $16,000? So it's far less. You're the most expensive part of this business. Keep that in mind. But also keep in mind that your goal is to make money. So if you don't try to account for you actually getting paid, you may not ever get paid. Keep that in mind. And part of this as we go through is my break-even analysis, and that's my point of setting the cost, the initial cost of producing anything. I would like to say that in my break-even analysis, part of that includes me getting paid. Very important aspect. Okay, so we're going to move down a little bit further. We have all these things that total up. So theoretically, it costs $62,460 to operate this business for 1 year, provided none of these numbers up here change. And yes, you got variables, so they are going to change. And as your business grows and changes, all these different factors start to change. So looking back at this, this is a way to kind of track to see if we're on track. Okay, for example, is this what I'm really paying out every month, or am I finding out that my monthly supplies are a lot less or a lot higher because maybe I'm doing a lot of business, and maybe I have gone and invested now in a website that's more sophisticated with e-commerce, et cetera, and now it's higher than $50 a month. We need to plug that in. We've made a change. So as we're going through, you need to plug these in. Notice in here I do not have blanks, and the reason I don't have blanks is your blank substrates are a cost associated with a given job, so they don't go here. We're just talking about the cost of operation. I do have product samples because these are things you're not reselling, you're buying and keeping them as part of your marketing and sales kit. So that's what the product samples are for. But as far as the items that we're going to sublimate and sell to the end user, that is part of the job cost, and you'll see that in just a few minutes. Okay, so theoretically, if we made $62,460 in net revenue, okay, net, not gross, we could pay all these expenses here, provided none of them change. But unfortunately, sales are cyclic and things do change, so nothing's really locked in stone like you see on paper here. But let's break this down. How do we work with that number? That number is way too big to work with. It's almost depressing. So we want to move further down, and let's start breaking that down, because ultimately I want to know, what does it cost per hour to operate my business? So the next question I would ask you is, how many weeks are you going to work out of the year? Most people, 48 weeks. It gives you 2 weeks of vacation and 10 business holidays. And even if you're doing this part-time, don't worry about the fact that part-time you're not doing, a full week. First of all, just break it down by weekly cost. It doesn't matter if you put in 1 hour or 100 hours. What does it cost per week to run the business? And that's a useful number. In this case, it's $1301.25 over a 5-day period. Even if you're working 7 days a week at this, don't put 7, because you'll be forced to always work 7 to make the numbers work. Put in 5, or maybe you want to work 3. I don't care. Put it in. Came out to $265.25 per day. In an 8-hour day, that's $32.53. So you see I've broken down this big number here into a much more usable number, and you're going to see that number get used as we go further through our discussion here. So theoretically, if we could generate $32.53 in net revenue, 8 hours per day, 5 days per week, 48 weeks out of the year, we would actually generate that number and everything would be great. The reality is sales are cyclic, production fluctuates. So these numbers help you to stay on track. That's one of the reasons I have the breakdowns. For example, you would never really sit there and try to figure out how much you made every hour because then you're micromanaging yourself. But at the end of the day, it might be good to say, how much money did I generate? I don't mean how many sales did you write, because in the reality of the world that we're in, of product decoration, we don't make the money until we decorate the product and deliver the goods. Therefore, your revenue is solely based on your production output, not on the sales input. Sale is no good. You don't actually earn that money till you deliver. So by tracking your output, that's when you're able to see what you're actually making. So if you're tracking your output daily and you know what you're making per item, you can take a look at the end of the day and say, well, you know what, I did 50 widgets and I made $3 on each one. Well, I only made $150, so I didn't hit my goal. Okay, well, maybe tomorrow I'm going to make $500, and by the end of the week it all averages out to that weekly number. Again, don't let these numbers scare you, because these numbers are still reflecting off our big paycheck and everything else in here, right? I mean, if we took the paycheck out, because I know if you've just started out, you're going to feel a lot more comfortable without that in there, because you're probably not making enough to pay yourself anyway, and that becomes more of your reality of staying afloat. That's the beauty of spreadsheets, because we can put different data in there and look at the end results. Okay.